Welcome back to the SEN WA studio. We're out here at Optus Stadium this Tuesday morning. First guest on the show today was a member of probably the most famous Teal Cup team in WA history, the 1985 team that won the national titles. He also played 109 games across three clubs, West Coast, Sydney and Fremantle in the AFL. He was a great player at South Fremantle as well. He was a great coach at Subiaco, premiership coach, and he also coached St Kilda in 2012 and 2013. Scotty Waters joins us on the show. Scotty, welcome.
Good morning, Duff. That Teal Cup was a long, long time ago, but fond memories. Some great players came out of that team.
It was a hell of a good team, mate. Of course, the Magnificent Seven, who played for the West Coast Eagles, one of which was you, and also I think Alan Jakovic was in that team, and I think Travis Edmonds might have been in that team as well, and I think Carl Langdon might have been a late withdrawal from that team. Would that be right?
It was. And then obviously, Peter Summits, Chris Lewis, Bob McKenna, Chris Waterman, Paul Pios, John Worsfold. It wasn't a bad crop. And many went on to coach and continue their involvement. So it was a great group.
It was a great group. Hey, you played in a grand final for West Coast in 1991. As a person that has bled for the club, how hard is it to watch at the moment?
Oh, look, the person that I feel most for at the moment is a new coach in Andrew McQualter, ultimately. So there needs to be a reality check and a real strong communication from the club on just where they are actually at. I don't think there's any surprises here, but at this stage, they are not better than any other club in the AFL. That's the stark reality. 10 wins, 63 losses is their recent record. 34 of those losses have been by 50 points plus. 7 have been over 100 points. McWalter has been handed poisoned chalice unless he gets unqualified support and acknowledgement by the club. And this is where Don Pyke needs to come out and be quite clear, transparent and strong on this is where the club is at and this is how long it's going to take. Otherwise, Andrew's going to be nothing more than a transition coach doing a lot of the hard work that probably should have been done over the last 24 months, to be honest. Great to see he was strong enough to demand some standards with Kelly being dropped. But it's a long road ahead. I don't think we've hit rock bottom yet, to be honest. Next 12 to 18 months is going to be solid.
So as a coach who coached at AFL level, how hard is this to fix? And if you're Andrew McQualter, exactly where do you start?
Well, it starts with unified communication from the club, and without that, he's going to find it very difficult. So, and being really clear on what the club is going to measure over the next 12 to 24 months, because if we're sitting here waiting for wins to materialise this year, it just is not going to happen. But if we're actually measuring McQualter and the team on how many games they get into the 1 to 3 year players and improved contribution from those young players, if we're measuring that, then that's something that we should be, assessing, I guess, from a coaching point of view. Let's measure improvement in their defence. At the moment, they're the easiest team to score against in the league. So let's see if we can see some improvement in that over the course of this season. But if we're just literally waiting on wins and losses, this is going to be a long season. So realistic measurements, very clear communication by the club, acknowledging, because Andrew McQualter didn't create this. This has been created by mismanagement of the list, and I would argue some average standards set over the last 2 or 3 years. So he's trying to fix it, but he's going to need support to do that.
Jake Waterman was on radio over here yesterday and he talked about the need to improve training standards and talked about quality over quantity. Who sets those standards and why are we, after a summer of training, still trying to convince young players that this is the standard you've got to get to? Surely that should be bedded down pretty quickly with the youngsters.
Well, it has to be bedded down with the youngsters. It has to be, ultimately that line is set by the coaching staff initially, but it also needs to be readily acknowledged and accepted by the leaders. You know, we see Nathan Buckley's come out this week talking about where are the leaders at West Coast, and when you actually look through the list, there's not many, like, to be blunt. And some may think that's a little harsh, but the standards need to be set by Cripps, by Duggan, by Hunt, by Baker, by McGovern, by Yeo. If those players aren't demanding it every single session, then that's going to be very hard for the young players to follow. So we're relying very heavily on a coaching group and very heavily on a small group of senior players to redefine the standards that they want to set. And that will take time. It'll take time to see the fruits of that, Duff. But the standards need to be there now.
If you were the coach, Scotty, would you be bringing in the senior players for a heart-to-heart and maybe an eye-to-eye chat about what is expected of them? Well, not just expected of them, maybe what you're demanding from them, because right now they are copping a lot of flack, A, about their performance, and B, about the way they're leading.
Well, ultimately, the thing that matters most with senior players, and you see Liam Duggan getting some heat for his last couple of weeks of performance, is they need to maintain a standard on game day. Certainly at training, but certainly on game day. And if they drop that standard, they need to be as susceptible to going back and playing in the waffle and in order. And this is where McQualter has to be strong. He started with, obviously, the decision on sending Kelly back. Otherwise, what ends up happening is good is the enemy of great. And if we just get average performances from the senior leaders and we allow inconsistency in their performance, then the standards won't rise. So they need to be judged, as always. Your senior players need to be judged, as senior players. The expectations are higher. Younger players will be inconsistent, but if the standards aren't set, and clearly that's what McQualter is trying to do early, we'll never see a group start to rise. And arguably, I think we've really got to look at the last couple of years. There were very few strong selection statements made by Adam Simpson over the last 24 months, and that to me has been a missed opportunity. McQualter's having to pick up all the heavy lifting right now, so it's going to be a bumpy ride over the course of this year.
So from a list management perspective, Harley Reid, do you fight to keep him, or do you try and cash him in for multiple draft picks, knowing that you need to build a critical mass of talent?
I probably am leaning more towards the second. It's looking, and again, you're only looking from the outside, so you're making a peripheral assessment. No one really knows how Harley is feeling about staying at West Coast. Probably Harley and his management, and maybe West Coast, but certainly Harley and his management. If you can get to top 15, top 20 picks for a Harley Reid, and they need to build out quality young players, and they need to do it fast. I think that's going to be something that West Coast are going to need to look at. I think the other thing is really having a look at Harley's performance this year. Last year, I thought he was outstanding. This year, it certainly looked distracted and inconsistent, and maybe he's entertaining the idea to go away. Only he will know that. I'm not going to speculate. But at the end of the day, if they can bring in two quality players, that's the way they need to rebuild their list.
Oscar Allen, in a similar situation, in a different way, obviously he's a restricted free agent, comes out of contract at the end of the year. Again, fight to keep or take what's on offer, which at this stage you would think would be probably a top 5 draft pick.
A top 5 draft pick at the moment. Oscar Allen, his stocks are declining at the moment, Duff. He's not playing great football this year. So, even from West Coast need to be quite ruthless about how they look at this in the next 12 months. And, arguably a top 5 pick for Oscar has some value to it. But it's been he's probably put the club in a very precarious position this year with obviously the negotiations that have been happening away from the club. But right now, everything's on the table at West Coast. That includes Harley Reid. That includes Oscar Allen. They're going to have to make some really bold decisions on their list to build out depth of talent. It won't be one or two players that actually start to right the ship at West Coast. It's got to be a cumulative focus on getting in a number of top 20 draft picks. It's the only way to rebuild a football club. It won't be done just on the back of a Harley Reid or just on the back of an Oscar Allen. It's got to be weighted numbers.
Yeah, I agree with that. It has to be a critical mass, I think, is the term. Scotty, let's move on to Freo. How are they tracking? 3 wins in a row. No sort of predicted premiership contenders knocked over just yet, but they look to be building week to week. How are you seeing them?
Well, this week's going to be a very interesting one. I think we learn a lot this week. It's a litmus test of Fremantle's credentials. You know, there's things to love about them. At the moment, Josh Tracy, best forward since Matthew Pavlich. That's what's getting thrown around at the moment, and you know he looks fantastic. Pearce and Ryan, we've got cornerstones, very solid in defence. So a lot of the pieces of the puzzle are actually right, but there's 2 questions that remain unanswered still for me. One is the midfield good enough? Now, it's good enough to force its way into the 8. Is it good enough to legitimately consider itself a premiership midfield? Sarong and Brayshaw are quality. We need more from Bolton, and we need more from Hayden. I know Hayden Young's had a lot of injuries coming back, but his progress over the course of this year, I think, is critical. They've signed him till 2033, so they know the talent that he has, but how quickly they can get him really becoming a tier 1 midfielder is going to it's going to be critical for their performances this year. The other one that I'd like to see them gamble with in answering this question, is their midfield good enough? I watched Murphy Reid as a 13, 14, 15-year-old playing football in Melbourne. The kid's a midfielder. Now, they're entering him gently in as a small forward. Gee, I'd love to see in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks them just throw him into a wing rotation and start to expose the kid through the midfield. He's something special, and he can add to that depth because it'll be a depth of a midfield. At the moment, I look at their midfield and I'm just not certain it's good enough to win a premiership, but I hope they can prove me wrong. And the second piece to that, it's about their ball movement. So the second question is, can Justin Longmuir create enough aggressive offensive ball movement for Fremantle to be able to seriously challenge the best sides? They've beaten West Coast, they've beaten Richmond. Those 2 sides sit in the bottom 3, and it was a good win against the Bulldogs. We'll find out where they're at this week against Adelaide, because Adelaide are showing so many of the credentials as, you know, being a top 4 side. So still some unanswered questions for me at this stage.
Yep, obviously Melbourne before the Crows, which they really should start favourite in. So hopefully they can knock over the D's and continue that build. Scotty, are you a sceptic or a believer in the 2 ruck structure at Freo? Because probably not this week against the D's, but the following week we would expect Luke Jackson to be back, and obviously Sean Darcy played his first game against the Tigers on the weekend.
I still think it's worth persevering with. I think Jackson's got enough flexibility to work alongside Darcy, and Darcy at his best is an outstanding ruckman. So it's worth rolling the dice and experimenting further with. But yeah, the next 6 weeks. Wait till Darcy gets fit. Let's have a really good look at how that works. But Jackson's best work is not centre bounce work. It's around the ground work. So I think it can work. We'll find out in the next 6 weeks.
He looks like he's come on, doesn't he, Luke Jackson? He's holding his marks, which was a major criticism of him in the last couple of years, that he tended to double grab and drop a lot of marks, but he's hanging on to them now. He looks like a guy that's ready to take a step forward as a player.
Oh, I think so. There's an interesting thing with ruckmen. Some ruckmen just relish being the big dog and not having a second ruckman alongside him. You know, we've seen it happen with Grundy over the course of time. They just relish being the only ruckman in the side. And then there are some ruckmen that have got the flexibility to work alongside another one. I'm fascinated to see how this unrolls. If we can get the dominance of Sean Darcy at centre bounces and stoppages and some marking strength and mobility around the ground from Jackson, then I think we've got something special.
One more on Fremantle and then one more on West Coast before I let you go. You were a player who was beset by injuries at various stages in your career. Do you think Nathan Fyfe is finished, or do you think after this last hamstring setback at 33 he can come again?
I think he can still come again. I think there's and maybe it's the fairy tale, but it's also looking at Fremantle's midfield and just imagining, you know, it won't be Fyfe in his absolute peak, but Fyfe at 80% coming, 6 games pre a final series and then playing that role within a final series, I think is incredibly important for Fremantle. They're not a big-bodied midfield, so he still has there's a place for him in the side. What I'd be saying to Fremantle, and I'm sure they will, is there's no rush to get him back. I'd put a huge body of work into him over the next 10 weeks and set him for, an 8-week campaign at the end of the year when it really matters. But his best is still good enough to be in that side.
I like that. I like the 8-week campaign at the business end of the season. One from Rhonda, who's a regular listener to the show. Please ask Scott whether the Eagles should target assistant coaches as a priority, poach them if necessary.
They need development coaches. They should be putting an enormous amount of time into their development coaching staff, even more so than their assistant coaching staff. This is a multiple-year rebuild at West Coast. So if you're dividing up their coaching resources, I'd be targeting the best development coaches in the game. And then the challenge is for recruiting, get the talented kids in. Patience is not a word we use in the AFL too often, but it is going to take some time.
Love your thoughts, Scotty. Thanks for joining us on the show, mate. Look forward to having you again on the show before the end of the season. Some terrific wisdom there. Thanks so much.
Good on you, Duff. See you, mate.
Scotty was, of course, he played for West Coast, he played for Fremantle, he played for the Sydney Swans. He was a premiership coach at Subiaco. He was an AFL coach at St Kilda. Give us your thoughts on what he's had to say. 0487